I'm so thrilled that I have a job in a place where there are fascinating spaces and ways to engage in transformational teaching and learning and becoming. It really gives me a chance to, for example, engage in this podcast, this way of learning that's through experience and a way of living where learning is a way to make our way through experience, just by being curious and by learning our way through as we engage with life. So, one of the things I wanted to do was to pay attention to ways that we can learn through experience that are a little bit off the beaten path of what I've been doing in this podcast. And so I wanted to talk with some people who do what I do in the beginning of class, which is teach and create learning space through art. So that's what we're doing today in this episode. I wanted to introduce Liliana Milkova, who is the Nolan Curator of Education and Academic Affairs. She leads the Yale University Art Gallery's education department. She oversees academic affairs, public education, public programs, and student engagement. Before joining the gallery in 2019, Liliana directed the Office of Academic Programs at the Allen Memorial Art Museum, Oberlin College. Liliana holds a BA in Art History and Old World Archaeology from Brown, and a PhD in Modern and Contemporary Art from the University of Pennsylvania. She completed her postdoctoral specialization in the Department of Photographs at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. She has published on the object-based pedagogy that you'll hear us talk about, also on 20th century European and American art and Soviet political propaganda. She's held several prestigious fellowships, most recently at the Whitney Humanities Center at Yale, and this past academic year at the Center for Advanced Study in Sofia, Bulgaria. You'll hear her talk about her beginnings in Bulgaria and how that experience, profound experience of where she grew up, impacted her trajectory. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Welcome in. Well, Liliana, welcome to Learning Through Experience.
Thank you so much, Heidi. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we've only just met, and so this is a kind of discovery conversation, and I'm really delighted for the chance to talk with you. I met you in the context of a conversation about room to thrive at Yale, right?
Yes.
And this is in the spirit of that conversation, but just briefly we talked and discovered we both gone to Brown and that you're interested in pedagogy, and I learned a little bit about your role, and so I'm so delighted for a chance to explore what learning through experience looks like from your vantage point and life experience and role. So we always have a start question here. I always start with this same question, and so let me ask you if you're willing to talk a little bit about, in the spirit, of course, of learning through experience, life also teaches us. So is there a life experience you've had that sent you in the direction of doing the work that you do?
Thank you for such a wonderful question. I think it's a great way to set up our conversation. And the first life experience that comes to me is a given. It was growing up in Bulgaria, in a country with a millennia old cultural heritage, where the past and the present coexist every day. And in fact, sometimes they blend into each other. So I was surrounded constantly by objects from the past, objects that have to do with our past's material and artistic and spiritual heritage, its manifestation into objects. And so I've always been alert and attuned to how objects communicate to us, with us, across time and space. So the second life experience that really built upon my formative years in Bulgaria is moving to the United States when I was 19 for college, in particular, coming to Brown. And this was the moment when I had to learn to navigate a new culture using the repertoire of knowledge and tools that I had had from Bulgaria, having lived there, only there up to that moment, and never really experienced other cultures very much. So I had to navigate a new culture through language, obviously, through new cultural symbols, through new experiences, but also through objects. So, learning how to navigate your new context by engaging with individuals and with the physical environment that you inhabit is an eye opening experience. And I think it led to my becoming an art historian, where I work with visual art from way past, from the past, but also from the more recent past.
When you talk about growing up in Bulgaria with objects around you, so that the past is not past, are you talking about buildings? Are you talking about art? Like what objects really drew your eye as a young person or as you were coming up?
All of these, Heidi. I am the daughter of an archaeologist, an architectural historian, a mother who was really a historian of culture and
Oh
religious
wow.
and intellectual expression. And so I grew up on archaeological sites. I grew up visiting museums. I grew up with artifacts within reach, things that I could touch and handle and feel the excitement that one would feel connecting with past experiences, with really in this very tangible way with what preceded us. So it was, religious icons were very much part of growing up, even though I grew up. And until I was about 12, 13, Bulgaria was still in the throes of communism, if I can say that, and religion was a taboo. But going to church for me was an aesthetic experience. It was not a religious practice, but it was an opportunity to be surrounded by objects of immense beauty, but also great cultural value and historical value and symbolic value.
Wow. Was it, does that mean it was the pews, it was the paintings, it was the sculptures, it was the furniture? You're so fascinating to me. Like already I can see you see the world in a fascinating way.
It was the multi-sensory aspect, I think, of being surrounded of objects that you can smell, you can touch, you could manipulate. If you think about walking into a church of the Eastern Orthodox tradition, and this is what I'm familiar with, it is truly a multi-sensory experience. You smell the incense, the candles are glittering, the gold on the icons or the silver on the icons is reflecting that light and they sparkle. And so you realize to what extent seeing is an embodied experience, that it's not just for the eyes that we perceive and engage with the world around us, but it is with all our senses. So I think that again set me on the path of thinking about how can we activate objects to tell their stories. And I think one sure way to do that is to think about their physical existence in our space and in the ways in which they can uncover themselves. Firstly, by visual investigation, the investigation of their material properties, how they were made, and why they look the way they do. Simply in terms of their physical and material properties. And then we can begin to unpack their meaning as an object of use or object of ritual.
Wow. Okay. So I grew up kind of going to church, but it was not like what I could feel the energy in your voice as you talk about the objects, some of which I've had access to, not in the kind of the sense that you're talking about. But I just got a new couch, and I feel like I'm under experiencing it right this moment. So I'm going to dive into my own life and my new couch, at least from the just the big first few minutes of our conversation.
But this is new couch, new things. I think this is a really important part of um, how do I put this, of really engaging with our world in a new way. Because when we touch new things, when we go to new places, when we experience new things, we're much more alert, we are much more perceptive, we're much more appreciative of what is happening around us. So I think we are more open as well.
Mm. So there's something about novelty of exposure that gets our attention anyway. And
Yes.
I love my new couch. I'm really digging my new couch. I just needed to go in there for a few minutes and sit in there before I even came to talk with you, because it's new and it's exciting and transforming our house. I digress. So let's talk a little bit about, in your own words, how do you think about what you do?
Yes, I think about it in two ways. First, there's the administrative role, and then there is the more exciting, practical, as in the sense of being out there in the world aspect of my job. So, administratively, I oversee the education department at the Yale University Art Gallery, where the work in my department is divided into four areas or pillars, if you will. And those are academic affairs, public programs, public education, and student engagement. And we have a team of 11 who work in these four areas divided into smaller teams. So this is my team. I am their best supporter, their best promoter, and my role there is to make them flourish in every way, to inspire them and help them do what they're already doing, but always better and always in a meaningful way, meaningful to them personally. But my other role is to make original works of art exciting, relevant, meaningful, and generative for every visitor who comes in through the gallery doors. We work with students, we work with teachers, we work with the general public, we work with adult audiences, or sort of, the, the regular person who comes in. I'm an art historian by training, as I mentioned earlier, but what I do really on a daily basis is design and facilitate experiences for students and often adults as well. And every time I do that, my goal is to make art intellectually and physically accessible to them, and also to give them critical tools to engage productively with art, but really images, any kind of images out there, anywhere, so they can navigate more mindfully and more critically their own visual environments, but also to come back to the museum and have fun and know that this is a place that's theirs and they can enjoy.
Okay, so it kind of makes the museum part of their everyday experience while they're here. It's kind of making it a little bit more homely
Yes,
and welcome.
yes. And we are also working with a range of audiences, and we want to make them part of our experience as professionals so that their perspective, their voices can inform how we do what we do.
Now, I'm really hoping to learn from you how to think about this. I have these experiential classrooms. It's part of why the podcast is called Learning Through Experience. That I'm really interested in extending our capacity, not competing with the capacity to think in brain-bound ways about concept, but adding on. So both and. Can we learn through experience? And because I'm in more of a transformational pedagogy, I'm interested in our ability to craft and cultivate and really believe in our agency to be able to create a future that we're excited about. In order to transform, I think we need experiences that give us the confidence where we feel safe and agentic around being able to create this. And so a micro way of doing that is that I start my classes with art. I often start with a little bit of an experience of something for management or law students or executives who are in my classrooms or advisories. They're not necessarily used to doing it this way. And so we need a little bit of reflection capacity that comes up. So I really want to learn with you and from you about how you think about this. I'm completely convinced that it creates a different kind of learner by reducing some of that very, very well trained critical analysis muscle and just opening the heart and mind and eyes a little bit more by listening to a poem or looking at a piece of art or listening to some music. And I don't know. Do you think that I'm on the right path here?
You absolutely
You're
are, definitely. And um, art has a certain democratic aspect about it, because when we gather in front of an object and have a shared experience with it, it's so much easier first to find common ground with each other, um, but also to have a low stakes opportunity to talk about each other, to talk about topics that may or may not relate to the object in question. In other words, art can serve as jumping off point for another
Mm.
conversation or as a step in scaffolding a bigger conversation. It is by starting with a shared experience around a work of art, you can achieve more. And I think that looking together, we can not only see a lot, but we can learn a lot. So, this aspect of collaborative endeavor, I think, opens us up to difference as well, to appreciating the perspective that each and everyone brings. And I have to say that I'm a big proponent. In fact, all I practice is experiential learning in the guise of object based learning. And object based
Mm.
learning is simply a way of learning which involves the active integration of objects into the learning environment. And these objects could be scientific specimen, they can be works of art, they could be archival materials, but something that is in our presence that we can physically engage with, and it can catalyze new experiences for us.
Hmm. Now, there's a way in which both the way that I introduced it and that maybe a couple of things that you said, it might have people thinking art is an icebreaker. And it's not that it's not that, but I think it's much deeper than that. Something pretty fundamental is happening. You talked about the kind of profound kind of impact of shared experience, but there's something that's kind of really deepens and invites people in. Can you speak to that, to what's really happening as we kind of set the stage by learning through objects?
Um, Let me actually go back to a moment and perhaps set up my response by saying that what I'm talking about is teaching with or through art rather than teaching about art. So it's never
Yeah.
about the telling, about imparting information or knowledge to the person or group that's gathered in front of the object, but it's about the object catalyzing a learning experience for us all together. And that actually has something to do with my own development as an
Mm.
educator. I began thinking that it's very important to match the artwork with the content that is being taught. So, in other words, to create direct content related connections between the object and the subject matter of a course or a particular class session. And then I realized that art is much richer than that, that it actually has the potential, the capacity to cultivate thinking routines, thinking dispositions, to strengthen particular habits of mind. So to
Mm.
go beyond content and really get at particular skill sets that could be discipline specific, but could be universal as well. How do you relate to another human being? How do you start a conversation? And art can be very helpful in being that shared object.
Okay, I love that. So, so if I'm starting a class with a poem, and class theme that day happens to be about listening, I don't have to have a poem about listening, because actually people might have an experience of listening in all kinds of directions, listening to themselves, listening to their piece, listening to the people that they're talking to, listening to the world, listening to the history, the context in which the piece was created. So listening might happen. It doesn't have to be just the content, the objective, overt content of the piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I start many of my curricular sessions in the gallery, as well as sessions working with adults, say community building exercises, with one particular activity, which is called back to back drawing. And it has nothing to do with the content of the objects that we're in the presence of. It's about really getting comfortable sharing with each other, finding our voices in the gallery, but also having a shared looking experience.
Mm.
And it really is a very powerful tool to get people to realize that looking is a purely internal experience, it becomes
Mm.
seeing when we begin to process it through the filter of our own background, beliefs, value systems, experience, and to share what you're looking at is really to acknowledge that you're seeing differently from someone else. And you have to work hard to find the right words to describe what you're looking at. It's somebody who's sitting where they're sitting with their back towards you, unable to look at what you're looking at. So it's a great way to hone communication skills. How do you get somebody to see what you're seeing?
Okay, so if I remember back to back drawing, which I haven't done, but I've witnessed before, two people sit back to back.
Correct.
One person is looking at an object and describing to their partner who's not looking at that same object what they are seeing. And then the partner who's not seeing the object draws what they're hearing.
That's exactly right. So there are multiple acts of translation here. Translating a
This
visual experience.
hearing,
Yeah.
listening, they're all happening simultaneously. And so this is a kind of perspective taking. It explains probably more quickly than a social scientist might be able to do why listening is such a hard activity.
Yes. And also, the person who's drawing the object without seeing it, purely on hearing the description of it, actually gets to ask questions. And it's a really
Mm.
wonderful opportunity to think deeply about how do you ask the question that will give you the answer to move on in your project, to move forward, to be able to get to the next place you want to be. And it's about asking questions. How do you formulate a question that will help you with what you need to know to keep going?
Nice. Nice. And it's fun.
It's very fun. And it's not about the skill of drawing, it's about the process.
Hmm. The process of hearing each other and seeing how the other person sees the world and how you hear that back and what assumptions interfere.
Yeah,
And
and reflecting
yeah.
on your own perception of visual information and how then you have to translate it for someone has a totally different set of perceptual preferences or tendencies, if you will.
Well, I'm aware that behind you, over your right hand shoulder, there's an object. I can't quite see what it is, but there's something on your wall. Is that something meaningful to you there?
I believe that you're referring to a small rectilinear object. It's an icon. It's an Eastern Orthodox icon of the Virgin with baby Christ. And on it is um, it's two tassels. One is red, the other is white, that are tied together. And that is something that goes back to Bulgaria's pagan roots. So we have Christianity, we have paganism that really blend beautifully together. So the red and white tassel object is called martenitsa, and it's something that we can make ourselves or we can now buy them in the store, but it's something you give to your friends and loved ones and family members on March 1st. It's a symbol of good luck, of prosperity, fertility, because it goes back to when those things were really important for the world to continue, for the world to be reborn in spring.
Hmm. I'm glad I asked. It's quite small, so I can't really make it out, but I couldn't help but ask. And right behind me, people sometimes have a peek of is this kind of minotaur, which is only there because we kind of bought a house that we're very slowly, kind of inch by inch, year by year, thinking about kind of setting up and decorating. Like the new couch 4 years later, we finally gotten. But we purchased this sculpture when we were inspired by it in walking by an art gallery in New York several years ago. And when they delivered it during the pandemic, I was in the midst of teaching. And so they knocked on the door and they delivered it while I was teaching and they put it in the chair behind me. It's quite heavy, so I haven't moved it since. So that's why it's there because we haven't figured out where to put it. But it occasionally peeps out from behind me. It's a minotaur holding a book, which one can, pick up. And someone picked it up, it seems, and dropped it. So it has been damaged, which I'm leaving just as it is because people are so fascinated with this that it's become part of the experience of this object for me, because this book used to be straight. I don't know if you can see, it's kind of, it looks like it's been
Yes.
dropped. But I thought I would share that with you since we're having this conversation, and you might have been peeping the minotaur over my shoulder.
Yes. At first I thought it's a brown bear, but now I see the rest of it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one of the things that I discovered quickly in meeting with you that was that we had both gone to Brown, and I consider that a kind of non-coincidence in some of the energy of our connection in the context in which we were speaking. You're a leader and a manager who cares about room to thrive in your team, and I was giving a talk on that day. But the energy of both going to Brown is about a kind of student-directed pedagogy that for me was really highly influential and a kind of beacon of light about my own sense of agency to create a less traditional career and to listen to what I was really interested in and what I found enlivening. I'm curious, what was the impact of that aspect of Brown and other self-directed pedagogies on your pathway?
I ended up at Brown entirely providentially. And I think that Brown being located in the city of Providence was a sign of what my experience would be like. Um, I have to say that so first of all, I have an identical twin sister who also went to
Mm,
Brown. The same year as
oh
me, we
wow.
attended together, we graduated together, and we were both accepted on a full scholarship. So
Mm,
Brown supported us all the way through. And for us, that was the first sign that this would be a transformative education. The fact that back in the mid 90s, Brown recognized the potential of two kids from Bulgaria, country which had just emerged from, the dark communist ages. I think was in a way visionary, probably thanks to Vartan Gregorian, who was the president back then, and open Brown to international students and seeking students out from, formerly somewhat inaccessible parts of
mm,
the world like Bulgaria. So what I loved about Brown, and it was defining in my approach to education back then and later, is the fact that you had the freedom to seek, to experiment, to take risks, and most importantly, to fail. And I did spectacularly in one class. I knew I wanted to be an art historian and in fact I actually ended up double majoring in art history and old world archaeology, and I'll get that in a moment. But because it was customary for people from Eastern Europe to pursue um, academic studies and therefore professions in economics, in computers, and political science or political studies. So I desperately tried to become an economist, and I failed, which was what I needed to be absolutely honest with myself and say, look, you're not going to be a finances person or an economist or a management consultant. Follow your heart, and Brown enabled me to do that, even though I took a bunch of economics classes, to still go back to art and carve my
mm,
own path between art history as a more textual discipline. Back then things have changed, and archaeology, which was entirely focused on the object as the agent of storytelling. And Heidi, maybe you recall Martha Joukowsky, a legendary archaeology professor at Brown, who for me was perhaps the most offered the most eye-opening educational experience at Brown. I took a dozen classes with her, maybe fewer than dozen, but close enough. And she was the most generous, most brilliant teacher and educator. She introduced object based learning to all of us in a very kind of low key way. She invited us to study in her own basement, where she had a collection of artifacts available for students to learn with. learn from the objects, but also learn with each other. So that's my first foray into collaborative learning, social learning, because we pulled all-nighters there in her basement. Her library was there, so we had books at our disposal. We had each other to talk through problems or ideas. And that was truly a formative experience in terms of what learning can be and should be in order to learn deeply and learn forever, to learn how to think and to learn how to learn and how to engage in dialogue with others to amplify your education.
So, I primarily teach in the domain of leadership. And one of the things that's the hardest to teach, certainly through conventional methods, is some kind of perspective taking. And I'm talking usually about taking a different perspective on humans, kind of on being able to understand with some sort of empathy and compassion, perhaps, what another person is looking to relay and what matters to them. And so you just said, until they understand what the impact is, or a version of what I heard is the impact of what standing in different places, taking different perspectives might mean. How do you know, as the space holder, when people understand in this way that you're talking about, the impact of perspective? That when you stand in relationship with an object differently, that your perspective shifts. This, in the spirit of learning to learn, this is a very important kind of invitation for me.
So yes, I could, I would probably include an activity to help anchor this experience into something shared, something conversational. So after people have looked from different perspectives, I would invite them to jot down everything that comes to mind as they're looking from a set perspective that they adopt as their perspective in the moment, and then share lists with someone else with a very different, if not entirely opposite perspective. And in the process of sharing, they actually acknowledge difference, but they also acknowledge some common ground there. And then in a debrief experience afterwards, some of these things will come through for the whole group. But it's really the one-on-one experience that I think is the most eye-opening.
That in some ways, by comparing, unlike the back to back drawing, now they're face to face comparing their perceptions and meaning making schemas, if you
Yes.
will.
That's a
And
beautiful
then
way to put it, Heidi. Face to face, yes, as opposed to the back to back drawing.
I'm just listening to your words, and before, because we had back to back before, now we have face to face comparisons of meaning making. It's quite difficult to talk about conceptually learning through experience, right? And so there's a little bit of a tension here in this conversation, because really I want to have people experience what we're talking about, not just listen to descriptions of it, right?
You might be familiar with this work already, and I'm not gonna give away the title because that's actually part of the activity we do with it. We conceal the title and have everybody look at the work in a somewhat unfiltered way without any textual information to already frame their experience and their thinking about what the work might be about. And it's in our modern and contemporary galleries. It's a sculpture that is so rich visually and conceptually. And we actually make the jump from uh, making observations of its physical and visual characteristics towards potential broader concepts that they might symbolize because of their physical qualities or material characteristics, how we could think metaphorically about the different aspects that this work exhibits. And I think that's a beautiful way to think about leadership, and which you mentioned a moment ago. If we find something visual, something tangible that can serve as kind of a reference point for people when they're actually in a situation when they have to show leadership, they can think back and say, there was that work of art. That was a wonderful physical manifestation of this particular quality, of this particular way of thinking about people, or or I don't know, resistance, for example, or resilience, or
Right. It gives shared
teamwork.
experience in the way that we were talking about before. And even though they might actually see it differently, they both can look at the piece. I'm really struck by how you talk about object based learning, and yet you pay so much attention to the energy of shared experience and even collaborative reflection. That in object based learning, there's a lot of people interaction showing up in your language around the reflection about it.
Yeah, we always try to build in time for reflection afterwards. And something that we live by is the importance of slowing down, looking closely, and having a small number of objects to engage with. Less is more, because
Mm,
uh, it's more productive to go deep with a single object and with each other than just jump from one object to another and cover a lot of ground. But miss out on the opportunity to truly hear each other and
mm,
reflect back on the experience together. It's hard because time is always limited.
yeah. So I asked you about a great day. It does is a bad day the opposite of that, or does it have other description for you?
That was a really hard one because I think I've been taught to make the most of what's given to us on any given day and draw my conclusions or learn my lesson. So maybe a bad day is when I didn't learn my lesson and something it the same thing happens to me again and I have to learn the hard way.
That's a little bit of life. Like no matter where we go, there we are.
Exactly, exactly.
Some lessons must be learned again and again and again and again. And one of them I think that's worth learning again and again that isn't a hard lesson, a finite lesson that you've identified that I think is really exciting is this invitation to how do I make sense of the world? What are the ways in which I perceive and kind of sift through the data that I see and then place my perspective against and in the context of the way that others perceive that I think is an ongoing, fascinating source of how to be human well, and a lesson, a journey worth engaging in. And as far as I'm concerned, doing it with others with art is one of the most beautiful ways to learn.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more, Heidi. And I'm so glad that you, in particular, are saying this because you're so deeply knowledgeable about the human psyche, the human experience, and what makes us human. And I think artistic creation is something that we all have in common across the world.
Yeah. And I love that you started by talking with us about the context of Bulgaria and growing up with kind of past and present side by side. It was such a beautiful invitation into experience and your context of taking in the world. I feel really impacted by your starting there. And I'm not quite sure what to do with it, but I think I'll be thinking of it for quite some time and thinking back on this conversation. I have a request for you, Liliana. If we were to you know, offer people some way to have an experience, whether they are on the Yale campus and able to actually visit the galleries, or only able to visit the website, or even just this podcast. What might we show them about how to engage with learning and life and themselves and each other that might just give them a taste of the kind of energy that you are bringing so deeply today?
That's such a wonderful question because one of the underlying principles, educational or engagement, if you will, principles of everything we do is to draw connections across cultures and across time periods. And if you have the opportunity to visit the website only, I would encourage you to go to our collection database, and the collection is fully digitized, so you can see everything that we have here and search by a keyword, something that is important to you, and see that every culture, every time period can something to contribute, has something to contribute to the
Mm,
discussion of that particular thing or topic or idea. And we try to
mm,
do this in the learning experience that we design for our audiences to think about making connections uh,
mm,
across cultures, to appreciate different approaches to the same topic or issue. Because at the end of the day, I think uh, we all value the same things. And it's a question of teasing out those parallels or analogies through objects that are right there in front of us. And so, one way to do this in person is, so you have the website, you can search by keyword. It's one of my favorite things to do. But if you're here in person, and the gallery is free and open to all of our programs are also always free. You can attend a highlights tour. And these are tours that focus on 4 different objects from across the world around a particular theme. And so you explore the theme from the perspective of different cultures, but also filtered through the lens of your tour guide. And our tour guides are Yale students who were
Mm.
highly trained in the span of a year to give tours, and they also took their time to research and design these tours with great depth and great
Oh,
skill. They're thematic, interactive tours that are tons of fun. We offer
wow.
them several times a week, so if you can, check them out.
Okay, that's wonderful. I'm really delighted to hear that. You know, part of the reason I do this podcast is to give people more access to the kind of education that only some people at Yale have experience of, and also so that the students who are in my classrooms or advisory will have a little bit of access to some of the deeper conversations that I'm able to have here. And I'm thrilled with reminding people or letting people know that the Yale University Art Gallery is free and open to the public. And what an incredible resource! I myself have not done the highlights tour. I'm going to do that. And what a delight to talk with you today, Liliana. Such a pleasure.
You as well, Heidi. Thank you for inviting me.
Hey, so after we stopped recording the episode of this interview with Liliana, she suggested a number of different ways where people might be able to engage with some of the works at the Yale University Art Gallery. And some of them are going to be things that you can go and do on campus, and some of them are things that you might be able to do from wherever in the world you might be listening to this conversation. And I'm so excited about this. I didn't want you to miss the what you might see in the newsletter or in the resources section. So go ahead and check that out. I want you to have an experience of what she is pointing us to and towards, and may you find it artful. Enjoy.